Leo Manalo's voice floated through the humid Manila air as the sun began to set behind the crowded streets of Quiapo. His guitar was worn, its strings mismatched, its body scarred from years of use. But when his fingers touched those strings, something magical happened. His voice, rich and soulful, carried the same depth and smoothness that once belonged to Elvis Presley himself. People walking by stopped to listen, some smiling, some whispering that this young man sounded too much like the king. They called him Elvis ng Kalay, the Elvis of the street. Leo took it as a compliment. Every night, he stood in the same corner, under a flickering streetlight, pouring his heart into the music that made him feel alive. For him, singing wasn't just about surviving, it was about belonging. He didn't have fancy clothes or a recording studio. His stage was the sidewalk, his microphone an old one his uncle found in a junk shop. Yet when Leo sang, "Can't Help Falling in Love," even the chaos of the city seemed to pause. One night, an American tourist named Brian walked by, recording Leo on his phone. He couldn't believe how much this young man resembled the king of rock and roll, not just in voice but in spirit. "You sound just like Elvis, man," Brian told him, dropping a few dollars into Leo's open guitar case. Leo smiled shyly, his English broken but sincere. "Elvis, my idol," he said softly. The next day, that video hit YouTube, and by morning it had millions of views. People from all over the world commented that Elvis's soul must have returned, this time inside a Filipino. Music channels picked it up, local news talked about him, and Leo's world turned upside down. Within days, his small street corner turned into a crowd-filled concert space. But the biggest shock came when he received an email from a talent scout in Los Angeles. They wanted him to audition for America's Got Talent. Leo stared at the screen, not sure it was real. He had never left the Philippines. His mother cried when she heard the news. "Maybe this is your destiny, Anik," she said, hugging him tightly. Weeks later, Leo boarded a plane for the first time in his life. He wore a simple denim jacket, clutching his old guitar like a piece of his soul. As the plane lifted off, he stared out the window, whispering a prayer. When he landed in Los Angeles, everything felt overwhelming, the lights, the language, the sheer size of it all. Yet inside, he felt Elvis's courage pushing him forward. At the AGT stage, he waited backstage, nerves shaking his hands. The judges looked at him curiously when he walked out. Simon Cowell raised an eyebrow. "What are you going to sing for us?" Leo took a breath and said softly, "Elvis Presley's Suspicious Minds." The crowd murmured, "Another Elvis act," they thought. But when he began to sing, the first note silenced the room. His voice filled the entire theater, smooth, raw, and powerful. The same electricity Elvis once brought to the world now radiated from this young man from Manila. By the time he reached the chorus, the crowd was on its feet, clapping and cheering. Some were crying, some smiling in disbelief. When the song ended, there was a moment of stunned silence before Simon stood up and said, "That was unbelievable." Howie Mandel hit the golden buzzer, sending gold confetti raining from above. Leo fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The crowd chanted his name. For the first time in his life, Leo wasn't just a street singer. He was a star. That night, back in his small hotel room, Leo sat on the bed staring at his guitar. He couldn't believe what had just happened. His phone buzzed endlessly with messages from home, friends, family, even strangers telling him how proud they were. But what meant the most was a simple message from his mother, "The king must be proud of you tonight." Leo looked up, whispered, "Thank you, Elvis," and smiled. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain, the world had just witnessed the return of Elvis Presley's soul, reborn through a humble Filipino boy who dared to dream. The days following his golden buzzer win were a blur of interviews, rehearsals, and fan messages from every corner of the world. Leo Manalo couldn't believe he was still standing on the same stage where legends once performed. But behind his quiet smile, something deeper was stirring inside him. At night, he began to have strange dreams. In them, he saw a man dressed in white, a glittering jumpsuit, dark hair slicked back, a warm grin that felt both familiar and otherworldly. The man stood beside him on an empty stage, holding a microphone. "Keep my spirit alive, son," he said in a deep southern drawl, "but make it yours." Leo would wake up sweating, his heart racing, as the man's words echoed in his mind. He knew it was Elvis. It had to be. He started to think differently about his performances. Until now, he'd been imitating Elvis, the voice, the moves, the charm, but that wasn't enough anymore. He didn't want to be a copy. He wanted to honor Elvis's soul and fuse it with his own Filipino heart. During rehearsals, he began experimenting with his style, blending traditional Filipino rhythms with rock and roll. The producers were hesitant. "America's expecting Elvis," one said. "Don't change too much." But Leo stood his ground. "Elvis told me to make it mine," he replied quietly. He worked day and night on a reimagined version of Jailhouse Rock, adding new life to the old classic. On the night of the semifinals, the backstage energy was electric. Performers were pacing, praying, or stretching, but Leo sat alone with his guitar, whispering a silent prayer. When it was his turn, the lights dimmed, and a hush swept through the audience. The crowd gasped as he stepped onto the stage, dressed in a suit inspired by Elvis's Vegas era but woven with traditional Filipino barong fabric, glowing under the spotlight. The music began with a slow Filipino beat before exploding into rock rhythm. Leo danced across the stage, his voice booming with passion, his moves sharp yet graceful. The audience went wild. By the end of the performance, everyone was on their feet. Simon Cowell leaned forward, his expression shifting from disbelief to admiration. "You didn't just sing Elvis," he said after the cheers died down. "You reinvented him. You made him new." The crowd erupted again, chanting Leo's name. But the celebration didn't last long. As soon as the show aired, the internet exploded. Some fans praised his courage, calling him the new voice of rock. Others were furious, claiming he disrespected Elvis's legacy by mixing his culture into the performance. "Elvis wouldn't approve of this," one angry commenter wrote. "This kid is a copycat trying too hard," another said. Leo scrolled through the comments in silence, feeling the weight of both love and hate. For a boy who had grown up with nothing, the world's attention was both a blessing and a storm. He turned off his phone and looked at himself in the mirror. "You're not Elvis," he whispered. "You're Leo. Don't forget that." The next day, as he rehearsed alone, a familiar presence filled the room. The same voice from his dreams spoke softly. "Don't worry about the noise, son. Music's about the soul, not approval." Leo smiled faintly, his eyes filling with tears. When the semifinal results came in, Leo advanced to the finals. He bowed his head, overwhelmed. It wasn't just his voice that brought him this far, it was his courage to stay true to himself. As he walked out of the studio, fans from both America and the Philippines surrounded him, holding flags, shouting his name. He shook hands, took pictures, and smiled through his exhaustion. That night, before he slept, he opened his journal and wrote, "The King's spirit is alive, but it now beats to the rhythm of two hearts, one American, one Filipino." He knew the finals would be the most important performance of his life, not just to prove his talent, but to show that music could connect worlds, generations, and souls. The night of the America's Got Talent finals arrived like a thunderstorm of emotion and nerves. Leo Manalo stood backstage, clutching his guitar, his heart pounding like a drum inside his chest. The crowd was massive, the lights blinding, and the pressure unbearable. Every contestant backstage looked tense, but Leo's face carried a calm determination. He had chosen his song carefully, one that represented both Elvis's timeless spirit and his own identity. It was, "If I Can Dream," a song Elvis had sung in 1968 with passion and pain, but this time Leo had rewritten part of the lyrics in Tagalog, his native language. Some thought it was risky to change an Elvis classic, but Leo believed it was necessary. "This is not just a tribute," he had told the producers. "This is my story too." As he stepped onto the stage, the audience went silent. The lights dimmed to a soft glow, and the orchestra began to play the opening notes. Leo took a deep breath and started singing, his voice trembling slightly at first but then growing stronger, deeper, filled with the emotion of every struggle he had faced. When he reached the Tagalog verse, his voice cracked with raw feeling, and the crowd gasped. They didn't understand the words, but they felt the meaning. The combination of Elvis's spirit and Leo's heart created something transcendent, something that connected cultures, eras, and souls. By the time he hit the final note, the entire theater was on its feet. Tears streamed down faces across the audience. Sofia Vergara covered her mouth, overcome with emotion. Heidi Klum was crying openly. Simon Cowell stood and clapped slowly before saying, "Leo, tonight, you didn't just sing. You gave us something holy. You've brought Elvis back to life, but through your soul." Leo's knees buckled from the emotion as the audience continued to cheer. He could barely breathe, tears blurring his vision as he whispered, "Thank you." It was the moment every performer dreams of, and it belonged to a boy who once sang for coins on the streets of Manila. When the results night arrived a week later, Leo stood beside two other finalists on the grand stage. His palms were sweaty, his heart racing. The host announced, "America's Got Talent winner is," and paused for what felt like eternity. Then the name echoed through the room, Leo Manalo. Confetti burst into the air as the audience erupted in celebration. Leo froze in disbelief, then fell to his knees, crying. He wasn't just a winner, he was living proof that dreams had no borders. Cameras flashed, judges hugged him, and the world watched a new kind of legend being born. When Leo returned to the Philippines, thousands gathered at the airport to welcome him home. Reporters shouted questions, fans waved signs that read, "Welcome home, the Filipino Elvis." But Leo smiled and said, "I'm not Elvis. I'm just Leo." He visited his old street corner, where it all began. The same flickering streetlight still stood there. He set up his guitar, sat on a stool, and began to sing, not for fame or cameras, but for the people who had believed in him from the start. Kids surrounded him, clapping and singing along. He smiled at them and said, "Never stop dreaming. If music can travel from Memphis to Manila, so can your dreams." That night, he held a massive concert in Manila's Araneta Coliseum. The lights dimmed, and a single spotlight fell on Leo as he sang, "Love Me Tender." Halfway through the song, the crowd began to sing with him, thousands of voices blending into one. And in that moment, Leo felt it again, a warm presence beside him, the voice of Elvis whispering, "You did it, son." He smiled through tears, his voice steady as he finished the song. After the concert, Leo sat backstage alone, holding his guitar and staring at the gold trophy that now seemed small compared to what he had gained. He thought about the journey, from a poor street singer to a man who had carried a legend's spirit across oceans. He realized that Elvis's soul hadn't returned just to perform again, it had returned to remind the world that true music has no race, no language, and no borders. Leo Manalo had become more than a performer. He had become a bridge between worlds, a symbol of hope, and the living proof that sometimes, dreams really can echo forever.